Hello kids, this is Mr. Whistler with your video lesson of the day, and today we are going to be talking about the Articles of Confederation, or America's first Constitution. During the war, while some men were fighting, like George Washington and his army, others were creating new governments. So these two things were happening at the same time. We've already learned about the American Revolution and the Battle of Lexington and Concord and the Battle of Saratoga and Yorktown and all those battles. While all those things were going on here, men were creating governments or the support system that these guys would need to win the war in another place. But it was happening at the same time. So in May 1776, around the time of the Battle of Long Island, Congress asked the states to start creating new governments. And each state began writing and adopting state constitutions. Because of their bad experience with British rule, they were really careful about placing too much power in the hands of a single ruler. So they really limited the power of the state governors. States took other measures against one group having too much power. They divided government's power between the governor and the state legislature. And they even went a step further. They didn't want a one-house state legislature to gain too much power, so they even split the legislature into two houses. And to review a little bit, remember, legislatures, both houses, make laws. And how do the people who actually work in the legislature or work in both houses get there? How do they get their jobs? They get elected. The next question is, who elects these people? Citizens elect them. And citizens were white males, 21 or older, who owned property. Remember, women didn't vote at these times, and people of color did not vote in this time period. So what they really were trying to do is keep the power in the hands of the people. So because the governor's power was so restricted at this time period, the legislatures had the most power. It's not that way today. Each branch of government today has power over the other two branches. But back in these days, the legislatures were the most powerful. So, forming the states was a much easier task for our founding fathers than forming the central government. They knew that the central government needed to be a republic. So remember, a republic is a government where citizens rule through elected representatives. And here's a picture of the Senate, and all these guys that work in the Senate are elected. So this is a republic. So in 1776, after they told the states to start forming new governments, they formed a committee to draw up a new central government. They knew they would need a central government to help run the war, to get all the states together and work together to defeat the British. But it wasn't easy. They argued and argued and argued. And after much debate, they adopted the committee's plan and the United States' first Constitution, which was called the Articles of Confederation. Now, under the Articles, the states gave up little of their power. They kind of looked at the Articles or the central government as a firm league of friendships between the states and the central government. They really looked at the central government as having two jobs. The only reason they needed the central government was to conduct foreign affairs, or really set up trade agreements with other countries, or in times of war. And most of the time, countries aren't fighting wars. So basically, the central government's only job, according to the states, was going to be to conduct foreign affairs for all the states. So each state really kept its power, each state kept its freedom, and each state kept its independence. The states kind of looked at themselves like a little mini country. So, under the Articles, the government had the power to do 5 things. First, conduct foreign affairs. Second, maintain armed forces. Third, borrow money. Fourth, issue currency or money. And fifth, they could actually make federal laws. Let's make some laws. Yes, we can do that. So, things that they could not do under the Articles were regulate trade. Now, regulating trade, an example of that would be like if you had 2 farmers and one sold corn for $1 and the other one sold corn for 90 cents. Well, most people would buy the 90-cent corn. So the other farmer is going to lower his to 80. And then the other farmer will go back to 70, then 60, then 50. Eventually, these farmers would lower their price so much that they wouldn't make any money and they couldn't stay in business. Well, the government sometimes regulates trade or sets up trade rules to kind of protect everybody. So a simple example of a trade regulation might be, okay, the lowest you can sell corn for is 85 cents. So if both farmers lowered their price to 85 cents, the people would buy the best corn or the corn that was closest to them. So this is one thing they could not do under the Articles, is regulate trade. Now, the state governments could regulate trade, but not under the central government. They could not force citizens to join the army. They could have an army, but they couldn't force anybody to join it. They could not impose taxes. Now, the state governments could tax their people in their state, but the federal government could not tax people. And they could not elect a president under the Articles of Confederation. So the state governments had governors, but their powers were really weakened, and the central government didn't even have a chief executive. No, we cannot do that. So if Congress needed to raise money or troops, they had to ask the states or the state legislatures, and the states did not have to give either one. So under the new plan, under the Articles, each state had one vote. So when they created the Articles, they had to make 13 copies, and each copy went to one copy went to each state, and they discussed it, and they voted on it, and they argued about it. And for these Articles to become the new Constitution for the central government, all 13 states had to ratify them. Now, if they ever wanted to change the Articles, and one big thing that kind of needed to be changed was that under the Articles they did not have the ability to tax. So if they wanted to put an amendment in here that allowed them to tax, they would have to make 13 copies, send it out to each state, and each state would have to approve it. So to create the Articles, 13 states had to approve it. To change the Articles, 13 states had to ratify. Now, although the Articles did not provide a government strong enough to handle the problems facing the United States, and it had a lot of limited authority, they could still make laws. So to pass laws under the Articles, to create federal laws, 9 states had to ratify. So, despite its weaknesses, the Confederation government did accomplish some important things. 1, we won the Revolutionary War under the Articles of Confederation. 2, we expanded foreign trade under the Articles of Confederation. And 3, we provided for settling Western land under the Articles of Confederation. If you guys remember back after the French and Indian War, one of the reasons they issued the Proclamation of 1763 was because they didn't have a system in place to settle Western lands in an orderly fashion. They didn't want just everybody running over there and grabbing all the land and killing each other for it. So Thomas Jefferson's actually the one that came up with this system. So he set up the system for settling Western land, and it's one that they pretty much used through the whole history of the United States. So, despite its accomplishments, the Confederation government had so little power it could not deal with the country's financial problems. Because of the war, the country was in a major trouble with debt. Congress borrowed money from American citizens, Congress borrowed money from the states, Congress borrowed money from France and Spain, and they had no way to pay it back. They couldn't collect taxes, so they were hurting for money. They hadn't even paid their revolutionary soldiers for their military service. Where's my pay? So, lacking the power to tax, the Confederation government could not pay its debts. So, they requested money from the states. The states basically said no. So, in 1781, this guy by the name of Robert Morris proposed a 5% tax on imported goods to help pay for the national debt. Well, to be able to tax, you had to change or amend the Articles of Confederation, because remember, the Articles said you could not tax. So you had to change them. And to change the Articles, how many states had to ratify them? 13. So if 12 ratify them and 1 doesn't, then it doesn't pass and you can't change them. Well, that's exactly what happened. 12 states approved the amendment. Rhode Island said no, so the financial crisis only grew worse. You fools! We need tax money. So the weaknesses of the Articles showed up even more when they started dealing with other countries. According to the Treaty of Paris, the British were supposed to get out. Well, they didn't. They said we were violating the Treaty of Paris because we didn't pay the Loyalists for the land we took from them. Now, each state had Loyalists, and sometimes those Loyalists were looked at as traitors, so it wasn't great for them, so they had to leave, and when they left, Americans took their land. Well, they were never paid for it. So part of the Treaty of Paris was, if the British got out, we would pay the Loyalists for their land. Well, the central government didn't have any money to pay because they couldn't collect taxes, so they had to ask the states. And the states basically said no. And there was really nothing the central government could do about it. You need to leave. No, pay the Loyalists. So we also had trouble with Spain. Spain stopped letting us use the Mississippi River. And the Mississippi was essential for farmers to get their crops to market. And if we couldn't use it as a highway, then they couldn't make any money. The Spanish were freaked out about us because they knew how land hungry we were, and they didn't want us crossing the river trying to take over their territory, so they just wouldn't even let us use it. And because we were weak, there was nothing we could do about it. You cannot use the Mississippi. We will shoot you if you do. So, the weaknesses of the Articles worried many leaders. George Washington described the government as little more than a shadow, without substance. And many Americans began to agree that the country needed a stronger government. So, kids, this this was the Articles of Confederation. They were weak. The Founding Fathers made them weak on purpose because of their bad experience with Britain. Britain had a strong central government, and they took our rights away. So they didn't want the central government taking our rights away. They figured that their state governments were good enough. So, complete your note taker, complete your evidence questions, and have a great day. This is Mr. Whistler signing off.